Hello, good afternoon. Welcome. We're about to start this session, very interesting session on broadening cooperation among the multilateral environmental agreements, insights from the Bern III Conference and related processes. Good afternoon. My name is Alejandro Kilpatrick. I'm the manager of the Capacity Building Subdivision at the UNFCCC Secretariat. And I have the honor of moderating this event, who has been organized in collaboration with colleagues from UNEP, some of them who could not be here at COPS, so I'm happy to take this responsibility and moderate this event. So this event is basically an opportunity to highlight efforts from UNFCCC parties and also on relevant MEAs on actionable concrete actions related to the Bern Conference, particularly around the topic of cooperation and synergies for cooperating capacity building programs. So we're here at the Capacity Building Hub, and the key words for today are synergies between conventions. We had a lot of discussions of synergies between the Rio Conventions, but we all know that multilateral environmental agreements go beyond the Rio Conventions. And for that, we have the Bern III Conference process that covers all these multilateral process related to environment, to multilateral environmental agreements. And the other key word is capacity building. So how we had some discussions already how to enhance the capacities for materializing synergies between the Rio Convention. So we'll hear from our distinguished speakers more insights on the other MEAs through the outcomes of the Bern III Conference. I'm very happy to introduce our presenters and panelists. We will, the outline of the event first will be a presentation from Iyad Abu Mohli. He's from UNEP, Director of Faith-Based Coalition. I hope I pronounce your name accurately. Thank you. He will be doing a scene-setting presentation on the Bern process and the real-world practical outcomes of the Bern III Conference. Then we will have a very interesting panel discussion where we'll have His Excellency Felix Bertli, Head of International Affairs, Division of the Federal Office for the Environment of the Government of Switzerland, and also Camila Cepeda Lizama from Mexico, one of the co-chairs on the Bern III, and the Head of International Affairs Unit and the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of Mexico. It's a pleasure to welcome you, Camila. And last but not least, definitely my colleague Tristan Tyrrell, representative of the Secretariat of the CBD. So we have the perspective of the CBD, which is quite important in light of the recently concluded COP in Cali. And then we will have some discussions with our panelists, their insights, hearing their insights on the Bern III process and how to materialize synergies through capacity building. And then, of course, we'll have the opportunity of opening the floor for questions from the audience. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Iyad for the presentation. Please, our technical colleagues, if you have the clicker, perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It gives me a great pleasure to be with you here today on behalf of the United Nations Environment Program on this important topic of the Synergy Day, organized by the Capacity Building Hub at COP29 in Baku. And first of all, I would like to extend the greetings and appreciation of my colleague, Diane Clamy, who you all know, who has been collaborating with UNFCCC and CBD and the co-chairs and the host government of Bern process, I think, since 2019. And with her efforts to make sure that the role of MEAs synergies is enhanced in the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Well, I mean, everybody knows that we are confronting the triple planetary crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. These crises are unprecedented in severity and urgency. And the relentless degradation of our ecosystems, the rise in extreme weather events, and the pervasive impacts of pollution all can call for immediate and ambitious action. We have no time to lose if we are to safeguard our planet and the people as well. The scale and complexity of this crisis, or these crises, demand an approach rooted in collaboration and coordination among all stakeholders. It is imperative to harness synergies among multilateral environmental agreements, ensuring cohesive, effective, and scalable solutions that can accelerate the implementation of global frameworks. This is why events like today's Synergies Day are so crucial. They provide a platform for building stronger alliance and leveraging collective action among MEAs to address interconnected environmental challenges effectively and strategically. I'm not sure if everybody knows that since 1972, over than 500 multilateral environmental agreements have been adopted at the global level. This includes a wide range of treaties addressing issues such as climate change, biodiversity, pollution, hazardous waste, and the conservation of natural resources. Many of these agreements operate under the guidance of the Rio Conventions established following the 1992 summit in Rio, which includes the UNFCCC, UNCCD, CBD, and the proliferation of these MEAs reflect the increasing global recognition of the interconnectedness of environmental issues and the need for coordinated international action. Synergies among MEAs are essential to streamlining processes and avoid inefficiencies caused by overlapping mandates and reporting requirements, especially following the proliferation of these agreements. Coordinated action enhances efficiency and helps countries, particularly those with limited capacity, to better fulfill their commitments. Moreover, because environmental challenges like climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are interconnected, collaborating among MEAs enables a holistic approach that addresses multiple crises simultaneously, maximizing the impact of global environmental governance. Distinguished guests and speakers, the Bern III Conference on Cooperation among Biodiversity-Related Conventions for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was held last January under the leadership of Ms. Camila Zepeda and her stellar role in chairing and driving the Bern III Conference, along with Ms. Clarice Siebert from Sweden, to a successful and inclusive party-driven process. And I believe Diane has consulted with His Excellency Mr. Felix Welty, so I'm introducing the Bern process background and what it is and how it can contribute to today's important discussions at the Hub. This milestone year of Rio COPs and cooperation and synergies is not only needed among the Rio Conventions, but also by all relevant conventions such as Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention, and the Minamata Convention, FAO Treaty, and others. This multi-thematic cooperation embodies the spirit of party-led Bern process. UNEP has been facilitating the party-led Bern process in collaboration with the host governments of Switzerland, the co-chairs of Mexico and Sweden, and the Secretariat of the CBD, engaging with 15 other MEAs, including UNFCCC, to support national implementation where synergies and actions are needed. And I think it is represented in this slide in front of us. The Bern process started as a dialogue and practical work in 2019 across the thematic clusters of MEAs, including pollution, desertification, and climate change on the post-2020 GBF, Bern I and Bern II consultations. 4 years later, the GBF was adopted with a better integration of other MEAs and their cross-cutting areas for cooperation, such as means of implementation through capacity building, financing, monitoring, and reporting on common targets and indicators. And I believe this slide shows the targets and the indicators and the different MEAs related to them. Through the Bern process, we have brought together 16 MEAs to discuss and to identify interlinkages between the GBF and the MEA goals and targets and means of implementation through a mapping exercise at the Bern III Conference. For example, this slide, the outcome of the mapping paper shared by the conference report. There is great potential for individual MEAs and especially thematic clusters of MEAs to serve as champions or custodians in partnerships for specific targets of GBF, drawing on their own expertise and data sources. For example, encouraging collaboration with UNFCCC and UNCCD to serve as champion or custodians in partnership for Target 8 on climate change, Target 2 on restoration, and Target 11 on nature's contribution to people. These targets cut across the 3 Rio Conventions. The Bern III Conference report in slide 3 and co-chair's reflection note is very useful for UNFCCC parties to implement Synergies action. It included practical solutions for effective implementation of the GBF at national and global levels. These solutions provide mutual benefits for each other. However, partnerships in action was a key highlight, such as this very partnership among Rio Conventions, the capacity building hub. We think this hub would fit well in the process and could be a great example for other conventions such as chemicals and waste included. On the national level, Mexico has taken the Bern process further and internalized the actions into a national Bern plan. You will hear from Camilla, I believe, about this. And this is the first time a country takes a leadership role in advancing the practical actions concluded by the Bern III process and conference, or on cooperation among the MEAs for the effective implementation of the GBF. We also thank Ms. Zepeda and her team for voicing and promoting the outcomes of the Bern III Conference at every global event in 2024. We are working with the countries to strengthen the whole of government and whole of society approaches in implementing the GBF. This is done by supporting concrete actions such as facilitating establishment of national coordination mechanisms among MEA focal points, and by providing help in reporting and monitoring on MEAs. Example, through the data reporting tool DART. DART is one of the integrated tools that UNEP offers to strengthen collaboration among MEA focal points on knowledge management, reporting, and NBSAP alignment. We are also piloting initiatives expanding the scope of participation in the MEA's related GBF work, such as involving the UN country teams more actively in discussions. We hope this Synergy Day at UNFCCC, the COP29, and the Cooperation Day at CBD COP16 in Cali will bring a solid message on synergy to the UNCCD COP16 in Riyadh, and this is what the parties at the Bern Conference recommended. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ayud, for explaining the process. And I think what struck me was the mapping you have between the GBF and other conventions and how they could by the targets, take a leadership role. I think that's very insightful and very useful, because in the context of this capacity building hub, we introduced also, we presented the joint Rio Conventions capacity building program, which is at least a concrete initiative within the Rio Conventions. But I think there's a lot that can be learned from the Bern III process and the experiences from Mexico and other countries that could complement and add value to this joint capacity building program, broaden this to other MEAs. So now let's move to a very interesting panel discussion. Again, we have the honor of having the presence of His Excellency Felix Bertil, Head of International Affairs Division of the Federal Office of Environment of Switzerland, Camila Cepeda, Co-Chair of Bern III, Head of Implementation Affairs Units at the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of Mexico, and Tristan Tirel from the CBD. So with this framing provided by IAD, we would like to hear maybe first from His Excellency Mr. Bertil, maybe from your perspective as the host for 3 international Bern meetings, what has been the impact on setting global synergies agenda? How do you foresee its future in light of recent developments? What are the challenges, for example, faced by Switzerland in aligning national priorities with global biodiversity and climate objectives? So maybe I'll start there, and we would love hearing your insights. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and also thank you for introducing me and for organizing this event. What I think is interesting at the moment, if you bring up among member states the discussion about collaboration and synergy among MEAs, there's a lot of support. This has not always been the case, but you can really feel the moment is here. We have seen in the presentation how many MEAs exist, so this willingness to bring those together, get out of the silo is very strong. But it's also interesting for me was when I went to the Bern Conference, it was in Bern this year, to see how excited people were to sit together and think how they can work to collaborate more together. So that we need such kind of a forum that is not automatically happening is on the one hand a bit shocking, on the other hand encouraging that the willingness is here. What I like about the Bern process is like a bit of this bottom-up process to check concretely when you look at the work program, you look at the GBF, what are the concrete elements where people can work together. We don't need always the big political plan, the big thing, but we can also work very concretely together. I think that is something what I like very much about this. And when you have so many conventions there, and some of them are very well known for like a very specific public, some are broadly known, more well known, but it's different, all of them can contribute something. I think also appreciated that it was one of the first time that the chemicals and waste cluster came together with biodiversity. That is something that's very key. There's a huge impact. You see that reflected in the GBF. You see it also in the chemicals framework reflected. That is key to bring those two together. Now, also the challenge is, for sure, on a national level, we have also to walk the talk. And I'm quite impressed once more what Mexico was Camila has organized there, that you brought all these people together. Perhaps we have the advantage in Switzerland that we are a bit a smaller administration, I assume, as in Mexico. And that we have quite the culture of working together. We have very few ministries in Switzerland. We only have 7 ministries. So that means you have a lot of kind of sub-ministries in a ministry. And we work a lot with joint working groups. So we have quite a strong culture of collaboration. And that is for sure something that is helping us in implementing those elements, because we know we need the agricultural office there, we need those who are for food security, all those elements anyhow are in the working group, so it's a bit easier for us, I think, to implement than as understood for others. The challenge now is how to bring that very concretely, and that's the task of member states on a global level, to now implement decisions that really forcing the synergies. And just to say one example of a very successful synergy process is the BRS conventions. So we had 3 conventions, Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm. Each of them was a standalone convention, and there was a merging process that brought the 3 conventions together. They have one secretariat. They still have their own life, but there's a lot of joint work program. We have missed, unfortunately, to include Minamata in that one, but you never know. There's always, when the door is closed, a new one goes up. And I think also that we have to be very mindful that we invest our resources there we can achieve most. There's a lot of debate how to include the climate cluster. I mean, we see the UNFCCC here, this huge conference, I don't know, 50,000 people coming together. We don't always have to start with the biggest one. We have to start with the most effective one. And sometimes it might not be the biggest one, the most fancy one, the most in the MEAs that will bring the most added value. I think we have to bring that together where we can do achievement, where we can make progress, where we have opportunities, and then we will also go in this direction that we can work together and achieve those co-benefits that we need to bring biodiversity, climate, and pollution closer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe just a quick follow-up to you, Felix, and then we will move to the example from Mexico. So you talk about maybe, in the case of Switzerland, being maybe a smaller government compared to other countries, but I would like to hear maybe, what do you think are the kind of governance structures, based on your experience, that countries need to deal with the different MEAs? Is there a particular governance structure model you think should be adopted, or?
I don't know all the governance structures in the world, so it's hard to that's like the golden rule to do it. I can just say what is successful in our case is that we have these committees that are incorporating different ministries, different offices, that they have to meet regularly to make joint recommendations, joint efforts that is helpful. That for sure we have these strategies that come from more than one ministry. For example, the biodiversity strategy, the updated one for the GBF. That is a consultation process going on among all the ministries. And these kind of inclusive processes are, in our view, very much helpful. Sometimes it can even go beyond. The government can also include civil society. That depends a bit also how much resources, how much time you can invest, but that would even be the best case.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to move to Camila. So Camila, maybe from your perspective as co-chair of Bern III Conference and Mexico's lead negotiator for Rio Conventions, how have you supported your country, Mexico, internalizing the Bern process and advancing national coordination from your strategic role? We heard a bit of a teaser, maybe, but would like to hear maybe a bit more on that, please.
Thank you. First of all, a complaint. Why does Felix gets to be His Excellency and not the rest of us? But anyway.
Me, I also realized that.
Yeah, just joke aside. No. On the Bern process, it has been very interesting because we have a role, actually, both Felix and myself, that's very unusual for countries, is that we are the same person going to all of these negotiations on multilateral environment agreements. So we get a transversal vision of what's happening across the board, but not many countries do, actually just 3, the Gabon, Switzerland, and Mexico. And I think that has brought us particularly a different view on how we can integrate better and how we can talk among ourselves, because it has always surprised me how in one convention we managed to get agreed language on a concept, let's say nature-based solutions or something on human rights, and then you go to the following and it's like it has never ever been discussed, and you start from zero and you're renegotiating things that you have already agreed. And when we try to bring something to the another convention, it's like, oh, no, this is not in our own little bubble, which makes no sense because it's the same countries. Like, it's so perplexing that you have to renegotiate things that you have already agreed over and over and over, when we could just talk among ourselves. And like, if your country has already supported that in one convention, then it doesn't make sense why it would be a problem in another. But you would be surprised how often that happens. So coming to this process now to Bern, I think it was a very good opportunity to bring people who have never been in those different areas, not just us that we get to go to all of these negotiations, but people who haven't even known that there were this vast universe of information that could also be helpful for their purposes in their own convention. And so Bern, what is really, I think, innovative is that it's a very friendly space where, because we are not negotiating text, we can actually take the time in a more planning, strategic, reflecting way on what's working, what's not working, how can we contribute and help each other and create those synergies and those co-benefits that we all complain about, you know, the workload that we have, and that this is a very draining process, each on their own. And then it turns out that there's already a lot that has been prepared when we're doing all of this monitoring, review, and report. I mean, there's a lot out there that we just didn't even know about it, right? And so coming from Bern process and hearing that and seeing that there were secretariats that didn't necessarily communicate among themselves, representatives that were not communicating among themselves. In our case, we are a large government, not like Switzerland. We're like, well, let's see if within our government we have that relationship. And we found perplexing that, again, we had sort of a communicating vessels with the different international units of the ministries, but then if you went a little bit further away and the people who were actually implementing projects did not know all the commitments that we have during all of these international processes, but also didn't know that they all have to report back and they are already platforms in one and another. So we did the same exercise with Bern at the national level, and we gather not just only all the focal points for, we went as much as we could on not just the 15, but pretty much every other environmental convention that Mexico is part of. But we also invited the people that are implementing those projects regarding those conventions. So we gather around more than 100 people. And it was the end of an administration, so that gave us a lot of flexibility to see, like, look, you're not losing your job out of this, so just speak freely. It's a time for us to reflect and just tell us everything that you want to complain about, like all of your frustrations. Just share everything that hasn't worked, and it was a very cathartic moment. And then now, okay, let's think how we could solve that. And again, it's the end of administration. You can just think as a Christmas list, like what you wish for. You know, just make everything demands. It doesn't matter. We're going to propose that to the next, so you're free to go. And that liberty, we find it very refreshing, because then we got a lot of very good suggestions. And particularly what we heard over and over is that we needed an intergovernmental body on environment that could just approach things on a more transversal way, because usually those tasks get sort of very put in silos with the Ministry of Environment. And the idea was, well, let's have a larger with the presidential instruction on how to coordinate. And those reflections are now coming onto the new administration. I'm still part of the government, so that's good news, because I got to take the conclusions and then I get to implement them. But we've now becoming that process on how we can make sure that we are following up. So it's a good experience.
Thank you so much, Camille. And I think that the element of just say what you want and let's have an open discussion is very useful. But maybe just to follow up on that and based on your example. So we're here at the Capacity Building Hub, and there's a Capacity Building for Synergies Day. So maybe from Mexico's experience, what do you think are issues or gaps on capacities that need to be strengthened to be able to move ahead on the synergies? I mean, you talked about a lot about information sharing. I think it's fundamental, but any particular gaps and needs that from your experience you think are need to be taken into account and or strengthened?
Yes, so we always talk about financial resources, which is always a gap. But in this case, I would say also there's a human resources gap. Because we need to strengthen not just only that there's that access to different information, but then how to use that information, because it's quite technical. You know, when you're talking about geo-referentiated spacious information, if you don't know how to use it, then, I mean, you can have access to it and you can know it exists, but then you don't know how to take advantage of it. So there needs to also be that capacity building, focus on there's different sectors, there's different ways of use it, but we need to make sure that our experts and that our government institutions, and for us it's even a delicate issue with subnational governments, because a lot of them, the implementation is not just at the federal level, but then at municipalities where there isn't necessarily the training needed to make sure that it can follow up. So there needs to be capacity training for sure.
Thank you, Camila. And that's very interesting, because in the UNFCCC we keep hearing the similar issues, that there are some capacities needed at the central government level that have to trickle down. But then, as you said, that if you break it down in too many silos, then you end up training people for many different purposes, and you perpetuate the silos. So I think it's important what you mentioned. Let me now turn to Tristan, there in the corner. Tristan, maybe I suppose you're still reflecting on the outcomes of Cali, but maybe taking that into account. The Kunming-Montreal GBF and the Bern process were recognized both by CBD COP15 and, I understand, also in COP16 just a little or less than a month ago. So through a decision that about continuing cooperation with other conventions to support CBD parties in updating the MBSAPs and integrate other MEA commitments. In your view, and taking this into account, what are the opportunities that the GBF provide to, in this case, UNFCCC parties, to advance synergies for climate change through the MBSAPs?
Thank you very much, Alejandro. And thank you to the organizers of this event for inviting the Secretariat to be part of it. Yes, indeed, the Bern process has been very central, I think, in terms of bringing some of the thinking together in terms of implementing the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And we certainly saw that coming out of COP15 when the GBF itself was adopted. And now COP16, which was starting to look at implementation and start to understand where things are at in terms of implementation of the framework, the extent to which parties, as they are going through that NBSAP revision process, what are their needs, where are they at, what are they prioritizing? It's a bit early in terms of the actual finalized NBSAPs for many countries, but certainly in terms of some of the targets that were being reported on at the national level, how they are translating those global commitments. One of the things that we're seeing is that climate change is essentially universal. I don't think there are any parties, so far anyway, that have not considered either the threat that climate change poses to biodiversity, but also the reciprocal in terms of how biodiversity, ecosystems, and nature helps to support our fight against climate change, how in terms of mitigation and adaptation, as we see the ever-increasing impacts of climate change. But as we've heard from the two my two highly excellency speakers here, that it's about that national coordination and understanding and translation of some of these global commitments down, but certainly to put them into national context. But also it's how do some of these concerns fit within the other obligations that many of them have. And as we've seen from that slide that was put up earlier about the mapping across the GBF, across all the different MEAs, just how climate change is one of those ones that is universal. But then as you're looking through the GBF itself, the indivisibility of the individual targets. So we're not just talking about implementation of targets 8 and 11 in the terms of climate change, but also what is the role of target 2 on restoration, target 3 on protected areas, the role of the private sector, financing, and yes, absolutely, money is extremely important, but also the one that is looking at subsidy reform. That is one target that is not necessarily being universally reported on by parties. But of course, it is fundamental to addressing both biodiversity loss and climate change, as well as the other ones, including the pollution-related, chemicals and waste-related conventions, and others. There are so many interlinking factors here, and the complexity across all of this is extreme, and therefore that translation and interpretation at the national level, and of course at the subnational level, especially because in reality it's local level implementation that's ultimately going to make a difference. How is that all being brought together? And so certainly COP16 welcomed the Bern process, and in particular Bern III, but it's now looking, we only have a few more years before 2030. Climate impacts are getting worse. How are we actually translating this into actual action? Thank you.
Thank you much, Tristan. And yeah, I was in Cali. I was amazed about the amount of discussions about the linkages between biodiversity and climate change, even through the dedicated agenda item on biodiversity and climate change. So maybe talking about cooperation, also for Tristan. So at COP16 in Cali, there was a cooperation day, and there stakeholders highlighted that they need a national coordination of capacity building and development, and that synergies save time and money. So what message or what insights do you have for the synergies they hear for the participants at COP29 to ensure that cooperation becomes more efficient and effective for, in this case, climate change and biodiversity goals in a mutually beneficial manner? So any insights on that would be appreciated.
Thanks very much. Yeah. So as parties are revising their NBSAPs, there is funding available to help them in that process, and they are undertaking, or at least they should be undertaking, a comprehensive consultation process in the revision of their NBSAP, the setting of those national targets, thinking about the actions and the means of implementation requirements that they might have in order to achieve those. One of the challenges, though, is that once the NBSAP itself is revised, that process can and often does halt. And then it's the implementation of that NBSAP that needs that coordination and that support mechanism, given that we are talking about a whole of society, a whole of government approach. And it's very good to hear about the experiences from Switzerland and Mexico in terms of formalizing processes that at least at the government level, there is this coordination across the different ministries and departments, etc. It's an excellent example if that is formalized within the government, and maybe those governments that are going through transitions can also think about having that open and honest discussion. But it's also about the wider civil society. What's the role for others in terms of this process as well? And that's part of the challenge. Because often, especially in larger countries where you have different sort of federated systems and you have different systems of government, there are challenges in how do you keep bringing those people back together on a regular basis to have ongoing discussions, adaptive management of the implementation of the NBSAP. But then, of course, when it comes to thinking about across the MEAs, what are those linkages between the NBSAPs and NDCs and NAPs and long-term strategies and things like that, land degradation neutrality targets, other policies and plans and strategies under the various different biodiversity-related conventions, which you would think would be relatively straightforward, but at times are not. And then, of course, thinking about it in the wider, the triple crisis, how are we linking to the new plastics INC and what the implementation of that going forward, once hopefully that is adopted relatively soon. But, you know, it's as mentioned, we are seeing this ballooning of commitments, and each of them have their own individual policies and planning processes, and there is that need for coordination. And as Camilla absolutely rightly said, there are technical challenges with understanding some of these concepts and not having to repeat the same conversations over and over again, whether it's at this level, at the international level, but certainly at the national level, where you need to have that ongoing capacity building. There needs to be a way to streamline that so that that institutional memory isn't lost between individuals going forward.
Thank you, Tristan. On that point, yeah, I think the importance of institutional memory and institutional capacity is fundamental. So I would like to now again thank Your Excellencies, both of you. Thank you very much, and Tristan. So in the spirit of time, then that concludes our panel discussion. But I would like to now open the floor to our participants if there are any particular questions. And if you want to direct it to one of our distinguished panelists or in general, please go ahead.
I guess I'm loud enough to say whatever I want to say. So I am very sorry I joined very late, but I think I came at a point where you talked about the biodiversity policy and you know how every country is revising their NBSAPs as per the new KMGBF. As youth, we have been part of that process, and it was a very, a long journey to push our governments and also UNDPs working in Pakistan, and also the ministries involved. So it was a very hard journey to ask them to involve us in the process. But I want to ask, and I would ask your advice as well. What do you think that youth input in such kind of process, is it important? What is on the overview on the global level, or how, in what capacity you work? Do you think, and what do you think, what do you suggest us? How can we make it more meaningful? Like, we go with all our homework and everything, but when we go to those tables, nobody's interested, to be very honest. Like, they don't know what they are doing. They don't, they bring in all the governmental organizations, they are there, and some of them, they don't even know what's going to happen. So all the funds, and to be honest, I was really disappointed. It was my first time, and all the resources, so much of the resources that they have, and it's just like being wasted. So what's your take on that? I would really like to know.
Thank you. Over to our panelists. Who wants to address the question?
I'm going to give a very superficial answer. So I'm with the Secretariat of the CPD. So I have a much higher perspective, perhaps, than my esteemed colleagues here on the panel. But yeah, the first question there about whether it's important, I'm almost disappointing that you have to ask that question, because yes, fundamental, frankly. And certainly within the CBD, the role that youth play, the fact that the GBF mentions intergenerational equity as part of Section C, which is one of these cross-cutting considerations, at least attempts to demonstrate the importance of thinking about this in the longer perspective, the future generations, and taking your concerns as youth on board in this. Part of the challenge, though, is that translation, because given that it's not a specific target, will it have the same sort of focus? And that is part of the challenge. And I certainly decisions do mention youth often, in particular, it's sort of part of the vulnerable groups, but it's about that translation down. And yeah, so that sort of national coordination mechanism, or whatever it might be, certainly should have youth representation, I would say. It's a question of how is that, and who are the individuals who are being brought into as part of that process, and how they're being engaged.
Camila.
Yes, so as Mexico, big supporter of youth, I mean, the question is even an offense, like it has to be. But there are many processes and there are many organizations that are doing a tremendous work. I don't know in Pakistan, but at least in Latin America, given this organization has not only enriched our positions, but has even made suggestions that we have incorporated into tax decisions and that are part of the goals and the targets that are part of the GBF. And so I think that enriches a lot of discussions and a lot of our views. So for Mexico, for example, we do have quite a few programs, both here and in CBD, where we train youth to be negotiators, active. Here, Fernanda was one of our delegates. And then behind, I have one of my delegates also, Fatima. So and they are very refreshing, and they actually give us incentives to keep on going, and I think it's essential. But also, I would say on the follow-up, you have a power to move things, because now with the social networks, now with demonstrations, with that rich network that you can achieve, you can push politicians by just peer pressure and critical mass to make things happen. And I think that's the most important part, not even the negotiations. I would say mostly back home on follow-up, like, you, government, you committed to this. Now let's make it happen, and just speak out loud and make some voice demonstrations and so on. And I mean, then you see results.
Yes. Okay, so sorry, unfortunately, our distinguished panelists have to leave, so I don't know if you have time for 30 seconds closing remarks, or you need to leave. Okay.
Synergies.
Excellent. Thank you so much for making the time. I know you're very busy, and thank you for our audience for being here with us. And this is just the beginning of Synergies, I would say, the continuation.